Tonight on Stuff We Say, the Sega Genesis, its games, and its quirks, in retrospective. So hello and welcome back to the Stuff We Say podcast. Today, as always, I am a bit of a Sega nerd. Once again, of course, I'm James, and joining me today is...
Carl.
Yes. So, Carl and I are actually, well, I guess we could say we're peers, university peers.
Classmates.
And the funny thing is, we both grew up with a Sega Genesis, to an extent.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've talked about Sega stuff on here before. I previously did a podcast episode with my buddy G, who has a complete North American Sega Genesis collection, and as he went over that, my wallet silently wept. But today I'm wanting to take more of a retrospective look, and by that I mean get ready for X number of minutes of us just kind of nostalgia baiting.
Yeah, just chatting about our fondest memories of the Sega Genesis, and perhaps, if we need more time, the Sega Saturn.
Yes. Oh, did you have a Saturn?
I did not have a Saturn, but I had a babysitter who had a Saturn.
Oh, I loved the Saturn.
Yeah, I think that's the... I only played Earthworm Jim and a fighting game on it.
Was it Virtual Fighter?
I honestly do not remember the name of the game. I just remember button mashing and kicking ass.
No, that's fair. That's fair. So, I guess, how did you first get a Genesis? I'll go into my own stuff with it in a bit, but...
Okay, well, I got my Genesis in, I think, 2000 for Christmas, and I only got two games. It was Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and I think it was Zero Wing. I don't remember playing Zero Wing too much because I was 8 years old, and I was very confused by just not having any linear direction to go. So I played a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but when I got it, I was so pissed because I had wanted a PlayStation 1 with Spyro the Dragon.
Oof.
And also all my friends had a PlayStation 1 and 4 to 5 games, and here I was with this system that came out roughly the same time, but it just... because everyone else didn't have it.
I mean, it was a good, 5 years older than the PS1, wasn't it?
Yeah. The Genesis came out in, 94, was it? Or 90? 89. 89?
89.
Holy crap.
Yes, according to my cheat sheet.
Okay, yeah. Wow, okay.
So, I guess, I've told this story a few times as well, but when I was a little kid, it was that generation of, Nintendo 64 or Dreamcast. That's what everyone had. But, I was, 4 or 5. My sister had gotten a Genesis back in the early 90s, and she wasn't really much of a gamer, so she didn't touch it much. I remember being like, yeah, I want video games. My dad went out to the garage and brought back a box with just a Genesis and a copy of Sonic 1, and it was like... there you go. That's video games.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah.
And I did. I enjoyed Green Hill Zone, and I got bored to tears in Marble Zone, and would always just reset the game and continuously play through the first zone.
Oh, yeah. The farthest I had ever gotten in Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was I think, Zone 7, and that was, my peak accomplishment.
Which one was that? Was that the Oil Ocean?
I think it was. It was definitely after the casino level,
Fair.
Which I was really confused by because I was really young and I'm like, I don't understand any of these.
Why is there pinball here?
Yeah, why do I care if I get all these bars on these screens?
So, what other games did you end up getting? Because for me, it was just Sonic 1, and then all later Genesis games I experienced were through, collections on newer consoles.
Yeah, well, I mostly got my collection through, friends who had gotten a PlayStation, and they're like, I don't play with these anymore. And so I got a pretty decent stack there, and I had also been going to it wasn't quite a dollar store, but it was sort of you don't go here to get name brand stuff.
Right.
A lot of the games I got from there were repackaged, and they didn't come with original cases or anything. But that's where I got my oh god, what it was Sega did this thing where a lot of their sports games weren't like it wasn't like MLB or NHL. It was so and so's like Punch Out or so and so's Home Run Derby.
Like, I think the big one was Joe Montana football. That was
Yeah.
the big one they pushed in the States, I remember.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Or I remember reading about it anyways.
Yeah, but I played a lot of baseball. I forget it was someone's club baseball. The teams were all kind of jumbled from like I don't know if it was like a random thing or if it was just Sega didn't get rights to players' names.
Was it Tommy Lasorda baseball?
I think so. I think that
Okay.
might have been it. But I will say my absolute favorite game that I got was Jurassic Park Rampage Edition.
Ooh.
Yes.
Ooh. Is that the one where you get to play as the Velociraptor?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I lost my shit when I learned that you could play as a Velociraptor in the game. And before doing this, I did a little bit of prep work, a little bit of research, and I found that the Rampage Edition had come out just a year after the first edition, which in the first edition you could play, or you had to play through like the different levels, where in the Rampage edition you could just go straight to the ship level, and as long as you like completed the first 3 in whatever order, then you could go on. Well, I always hated the level where you could just jump on the dinosaur and just run through everything, which you couldn't do in the first one. But yeah, I played Jurassic Park Rampage Edition so much that I would have nightmares about being trapped in the game.
Oh, God.
And there's one level where you start in a pteranodon nest,
Yeah.
and you have to like make your way to the like the bottom. And yeah, I had nightmares of getting picked up by the pteranodon and taken back up to the nest, and I was stuck in that level in my dreams so often.
I think the only experience I've had like that is I remember that this isn't a Genesis game obviously, but like I remember when Minecraft was in beta. So do you remember that? Like when I was in middle school, and I remember discovering and playing so much of it, like that I would literally like dream about playing it.
Yep.
Probably the best games on the system, and I say this as someone who I feel like people see as a massive Sonic fan, is either Streets of Rage 2 or Gunstar Heroes.
Never played Gunstar Heroes.
It's really interesting. You familiar with Treasure, the game developer? They did like Dynamite Heady. They did like a McDonald's game of all thing that was oddly good.
Yeah.
Gunstar Heroes is pretty much imagine Contra. Have you ever played Contra? So
yes,
fast-paced
absolutely.
run and gun, but on crack. There's this really famous boss in it called Seven Force, where depending on the difficulty, it will transform into all these different forms. But the gist of the boss is that you aren't just stationary fighting it. You're either chasing it or running after it, or running away from it while fighting it.
Oh, nice.
And in Streets of Rage 2, it's a good time. And
Well,
you
yeah.
beat stuff up.
Well, wasn't Streets of Rage more like the grandfather of pretty much most like that form of game, because you're side scrolling, just
Beat 'em ups.
punching your way through everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't like there was like
There's Final Fight,
there was Final Fight. There was I think it was
Double Dragon.
I don't remember Double Dragon.
There was another one which wasn't great, but it's one I remember playing. I forget where I played it, but I played it when I was fairly young. And there was a Power Rangers game.
Yeah.
That was, and it was weird because it was a beat 'em up, but like, and most 2D beat 'em ups, you can still like go into the background and foreground. But in this one, it was just flat, like, a Sonic or something, but it was still a beat 'em up.
Yeah.
So it was way simple and
Yeah.
kind of boring after a while, but also it was cool because I guess just because it was Power Rangers.
Yeah.
The best way to play Genesis stuff nowadays, like they have this collection on the Switch and PS4.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is great. It's really, really good. I haven't had a chance to try out that new mini Sega Genesis console they released. I've heard good things, but
Yeah.
probably some of the coolest things I found on that was Alien Storm, which was another treasure game. And pretty much imagine that same Contra style of game, except it's nothing but boss fights, back to back. And you only have one life, And if you die, it's game over. But it's super arcadey because the point of the game is just to see how far you can get on one life.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I think the formula for those kind of games are seriously still around today because all it is just, oh, you've completed this level. Well,
Yeah.
here's this level that's slightly harder, but then the reward at the end, ugh, you got to get that reward, so you just keep playing and playing.
And it's nice because for a while with modern games, like what I love about Genesis games is, I mean, Sega didn't have as many established franchises as Nintendo, so you got a lot more weird experimental stuff
Yes,
like
yeah.
the Ooze, but also the entire generation of games, they were more complex than say like NES games were, but they still had that simplicity to it, and that's something that I think only in the past few years we've really started to see in games that weren't intended as retro throwbacks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
What I really miss from kind of that age when we first got Genesis console and stuff, and something I wish we were old enough at the time to truly, I guess, dive into was how cheap used games were then.
Oh yeah.
Like, did they have Funko Land in Canada?
No, we mainly had EB Games. Well, actually, we had GameStop, which is just EB Games. Let's see. There was one game store that was independent. It was called the Game Exchange, like the letter X and then change.
They still have those in Texas.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I know that because the one near my parents' place apparently went out of business a few months ago.
Yeah, well, I remember that's where I got a lot of my first, like, larger consoles. Like, that's where I got my first 360. That's where I got my first PS3. Actually, I still have that PS3. You could go in and they took DVDs as well, so I just, like, unloaded all of the DVDs I didn't watch anymore, and I could pick up a bunch of 360 games.
The funniest thing is, when until like 2008 or so, rental stores were still a big thing as well.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a buddy of mine where he has, I'm not going to say his name because I don't know if he wants me telling the story in full. But essentially, it took him a good year or so to finally beat Phantasy Star 4 because a little mom and pop rental store like had the game, but he could only take it out and play it like on weekends. And of course, there's no guarantee that it would be his file whenever he'd rent it out again. So finally, he finally got the game for his birthday at some point, right? And finally got to beat it after, months of just taking it out, potentially have to restart his save file from the beginning, grinding.
Oh, yeah.
That was commitment, man.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I remember there were a few times where I had gotten super far in Sonic 2, and I'm like, all right, this is the farthest I've gotten. But then, like, one of my parents was like, hey, come help me with this real quick. And I'm like, okay, hit pause, and I go off, I do something, and I come back, and we only had one TV, so my dad would be watching TV or something, and I'm like, okay, I'll, like, wait until he's done like watching the news or whatever, and just kind of chill somewhere else. And then when I see him not like watching TV anymore, I go back in there and my game was turned off. And on Sonic 2, you couldn't save.
They didn't even have a password system.
It was just you had to just start completely over, and I would be just so furious. And there were a couple games where I surprised myself by being able to get to the third or fourth level, but I would have to pause because I had to stop playing for the day. And then my parents were going, "You're wasting energy," and just turn it off right in front of my face. And I would just be so distraught.
Did you ever end up doing the thing? I didn't do this, with my sister's Genesis because, I only had that for, it wasn't very long because eventually she sold it to like one of the neighbor kids for like $20, as older sisters tend to do. But did you ever do that thing where, you're playing a game, and I did this during the GameCube era, right before I actually got a memory card, where you're playing and you don't want to lose your progress, so you just leave the console on and turn the TV off.
Oh, yeah.
While you go to bed or do whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think there are good, 10, 12-hour periods where I just had the console on, but the TV was off, and I was off doing something else, or, I'd gone to school or something.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And, in retrospect, I'm kind of glad that these things didn't have a tendency of like frying themselves.
Oh yeah. Well, there's something to be said for like the Genesis, because in a lot of games, if systems nowadays, if you leave them on or running, it just deteriorates the machine itself. Like with the 360, remember the red ring of death?
Oh God, the red ring. So I actually have something kind of Genesis related like that. So my parents, I love them. They aren't exactly what I'd call tech savvy. I mean, that's fine. You know, I think it's fair to say they're a little older. I don't expect them to know everything about tech. But I remember once I got grounded, my mom was like, all right, well, I'm taking the Wii away. Well, this is why I still had the 360. So I played that. And she was like, okay, well, I'm taking the 360 away.
Yeah.
So my grandma had gotten me a DS a while back. And I had gotten the Sonic there's a Sonic the Hedgehog collection for DS where it was all 4 of the main Genesis Sonic games, but on the DS it was actually pretty good. The only issue is, of course, they had to like crop in the image a bit just because.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to sneak in the DS. I'm just going to hide it under my pillow and very sneakily play Sonic while I don't have my 360 or Wii on hand. So. Yeah, that was a thing. I think that happened a couple times. I promise I wasn't a bad kid. I was just an asshole.
Did you ever like sneak I had the Game Boy SP.
Yeah.
And I would have to turn the sound off, but I would like sit in my bed with the door to my bedroom in the opposite corner, and I would be sitting there with a book, but like while grounded, obviously.
Yeah.
Sitting there with a book, and I'd be playing like Mario Kart or something.
I think I only got caught like twice.
Yeah.
What's so funny about the Genesis thing is I got back into retro gaming when I was in high school. Started doing like flea markets with friends and whatnot. And I somehow at one point ended up with 4 different Genesis consoles. So I had the Model 1, the Model 2, even the Model 3, and an extra Model 2. And so I found a copy of Sonic, and it was the same. It was tattered enough that looked almost like the one my sister had when we were.
Yeah.
I actually gave that to her, and it's pretty cool because now my niece and nephew are able to play Sonic 1, and it's great. I didn't actually have any AV cable, so I gave her an RF connector for it. So they're literally experiencing these games like we did. Of the worst possible picture and audio quality, but also I don't think I'd have it any other way, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, talking about the wrong cables, when I got mine, I didn't have any cables. I had just a power cord, so it was kind of obvious my parents hadn't gotten it from like a store. They had gotten it from, I don't know, a friend or like a
game exchange or something.
Even a game exchange, yeah, and they just didn't have the cords either. So even though I had gotten a video game system for Christmas, I could do nothing with it.
I mean, you could turn it on, technically.
Yeah, I could turn it on, and look at the 3 little lights I get.
Yeah, wow, it glows red when I press the button. That's great.
I can push reset, and they very briefly go off and come back on.
So awesome. I mean, there's a power brick. Those power bricks were massive.
Oh, yeah.
Were you familiar with the Sega CD?
A little bit, yeah.
So, for those listening, there were more. Sega was infamous for making too many different versions of the Genesis and too many add-ons for it.
Yeah.
Because there was a Genesis Model 1, 2, and 3. There was the Sega CD, which was a CD-based add-on. There was the 32X, which was another add-on that a lot of people joked looked like a mushroom cloud because it kind of nuked Sega's reputation because of how kind of slapdash and out of nowhere it came. Like they literally released the 32X in North America to try to prolong the life of the Genesis the same day the Saturn was released in Japan.
Oh.
Yeah.
No contest.
Like no contest. And but then there was also the CDX, which was a Sega Genesis with a Sega CD built into it. And probably the coolest one, Nintendo Switch Eat Your Heart Out, there was a Sega Nomad, which was a portable Sega Genesis. It got like 2 hours of battery life off of 6 AA's, very similar to the Switch.
Yeah, I think my cousin actually had one of those. Yeah. You burn through the batteries so fast.
Like, I joke about the Switch, but at least the Switch has a rechargeable battery, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is, you needed to put 6 double A's into that thing.
Oh, yeah.
But it's funny because if you got the full setup, so like I have what's called the tower at home, so I have a Genesis Model 2 with a Sega CD with a 32X. And the issue is that all 3 of those components needed their own power supply. So Sega famously also made their own line of, what are they called, like surge protectors?
Yeah.
With enough space in between so you could plug in all 3 power supplies.
Oh, jeez. Ugh.
By the way, for anyone who wants to get them nowadays, you can actually buy aftermarket power supplies where it's just 1 brick with 3 plugs and it works perfectly.
Oh, yeah. Well, they were probably thinking, you know what? People will want as many of these as they can, as many as they can get. Because it's like, oh, okay, yeah, your first gen comes out. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I don't think E3 goes back that far. But
94.
94, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, here on our early 90s cable network television show that perhaps maybe 1,000 people were tuning into. I'm sorry, I don't have real numbers. But the Gen 2, please go out and get it. Add it to your Gen 1.
And it's so funny as well because they made, like, pretty famously, they had the Master System before the Genesis, right? And they made a backwards compatible adapter. Mm-hmm. But because of how they shaped it, you could only actually use it on the Genesis Model 1.
Yeah.
So what do? They make the Power Base Converter 2, which works on any model shape-wise, except they only release it in Europe.
Oh, well, I mean, you gotta pay your dues to the mail service, that's for sure.
I guess, but it's like, there is so much Genesis stuff, and like I always get anxiety just looking at complete Genesis collections of people who, gotten every Genesis model. The weirdest one I found is, this was a third-party one that Sega allowed, and it was called the Pioneer Laser Active. It was a Laserdisc player, and also had modules you could insert into it, one of which was a Sega Genesis. And this thing would have costed you about $1,000 back in the 90s.
Okay, I'm gonna date myself here for a second. Yo, I heard you like Sega Genesis. How would you like a Sega Genesis for your Sega Genesis?
I wouldn't be surprised, though, where it's like, okay, introducing the new Sega Genesis Model 2. It's just a Sega Genesis, but with 2 cartridge slots.
Hey, switch back and forth between games, or play 2 games at the same time, 1 controller.
What's that, split screen?
Split screen?
Split screen with yourself?
What?
So what made us decide to do this podcast, we talked a bit about Vectorman the other day.
Yes, Vectorman. Oh my god.
A little robot living in a very dystopian future that looks kind of like how you'd imagine the worst climate change predictions to be. Which is to say, it looks like the opening from WALL-E. And you're playing as a little robot guy made out of balls, which seems odd, but...
I remember exploding into balls a lot.
But the balls were kind of cool because, you really got to see, like, how animated he was and whatnot.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It was very primitive looking, like, almost Donkey Kong Country-esque, like, 3D and 2D, but, like, it looked cool for the time.
Yeah, it was a nice 3D side-scroller.
Yeah, and... I mean, it was hard. I don't think I ever beat either of the Vectorman games.
Yeah, I probably didn't get past the second or third stage.
But, like, it was cool. It's one of those things where it's like, I think of the Genesis, I'm like, hey, that's a game that's pretty neat.
Yeah. I honestly don't remember too much. Did you, like, collect health by collecting more, like, little green balls?
I think, I remember, like, to get some power-ups, you literally had to shoot, like, CRT screens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Like, Vectorman's weird because it's one of those things where it's, like, really impressive, but not really something I'd go back and play.
Yeah.
Or, like, it's a cool 90s set piece.
Yeah. I had this really weird football game. It was, like, Jail Yard Football, something like that. I forget.
Was it Mutant League?
I don't think it was Mutant League, but...
That sounds like it could get real, like... Just imagine people running out into, like, a football field with, like, shivs, and,
No, well, it was, there were, like, maybe 6 teams to choose from and to play against, but for some random reason, this big giant fight screen would like pop up, and you'd have to just button mash to like fight the other team. And they had like all these different little sound bits, like if your player would get tackled, his like pads would come flying off and shout, "Oh, my knee!" or something like that.
Oh, I like that. That's actually kind of cute and creative.
I never understood it though, so I was like,
Actually, here's one. Mutant League Hockey.
mm-hmm.
Because as we know, hockey's good. I like hockey. It's especially old school hockey, where it's just legalized fighting.
Yeah.
Mutant League Hockey, when people make the joke about hockey being legalized fighting, I think no game like epitomizes that better than this game does, because you're literally just playing as these grotesque, this disgusting looking creatures as you go around, I guess, playing hockey and also beating the living hell out of each other.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Well, you mentioned violent video games, and it's something that I kind of miss about the Genesis, because do you remember all the buttons you had?
I remember when you got the 6-button controller. Yeah, because a lot of people forget as well is the Genesis had these really nice, beefy 3-button controllers at launch.
That's all I had when growing up.
But then later on, you got the 6-button pad, which I didn't like as much, because even though you had more buttons, it was a physically smaller controller.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have big meat clobber hands.
Yeah.
I had massive meat clobber hands as a child. Like, damn.
Yeah. Well, bringing it back around to the violent video game, Mortal Kombat.
Mortal Kombat was... I think there's no denying that the Genesis had the better version of Mortal Kombat.
Absolutely.
So there was a lot of controversy when it came out in arcades, because Mortal Kombat, as you expect from the name, is filled to the brim in blood. There was a fatality where you could literally rip someone's spine out.
Yep.
It was awesome.
Well, you heard about the controversy where, in order to be released in the States, they had to remove the blood.
Yeah, and Nintendo outright removed the blood.
Yeah.
But Sega got off on a technicality and just locked it behind a secret. Except I think the code was in the manual. Like, I remember, I could be remembering wrong, but it was a secret code that was in the manual.
You could turn the blood on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember I didn't grasp the concept of combos when I was little.
Yeah.
So I think I played Mortal Kombat 2, and I would just, get close to them and just button mash and just throw punches, kicks, duck, kick. And I never learned how to do anyone's like special abilities or anything.
No, neither did I. Like, it's so funny because the things that were causing so much controversy, I never learned how to do any of that till I was older, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And when you're little kids, it's like, oh, how do I do it? I'm just going to mash buttons.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I didn't learn until much later in life about like the super uppercut where you just down and uppercut.
Yeah.
Or I think it was down up. No, it was just down and punch, and you could just sit there down punch until and just throw them up in the air until they either died or they broke through and just comboed you to death.
Honestly, I don't think Nintendo ever made up. I don't think they actually managed to make up for the whole Mortal Kombat thing until... It's so weird. Like, they made a point of censoring Mortal Kombat, and then a few years later they made Killer Instinct.
Oh, yeah?
Which was fantastic. I love I'm trash at all fighting games except for Smash Bros, right? Which I finally put some time into recently, but I love them.
Yeah, I remember playing more of the newer ones, but I'd be fighting someone, and then I'm like, oh, why isn't this combo working? And you like pause the game and like look through the combo list while your friend's there, like, come on, you're ruining the game.
Where would we be without game facts nowadays?
Oh, probably in the dark ages, or like the one person who like discovers Scorpion's fatality is like a god amongst men.
Here's the thing as well, like I see a lot of like older gamers complaining about game facts and whatnot now, but like some of the games like Breath of the Wild are so big and so massive that I literally don't know how people would discover everything without
without the game guys.
Yeah. So we've been going for nearly an hour now. So do you have any final thoughts about the Sega Genesis besides got to get that blast processing?
Oh, yeah. Well, last thoughts about the Sega Genesis. First of all, I miss you, and I'm sorry that I gave you up for a PlayStation 1. And I'm sure if I went back now and played through some of the games that I just either didn't have the patience for or were too hard because I was 8 years old and also didn't pay attention to story at all,
Right.
I think I would have a very different outlook on the Sega Genesis.
No, that's completely. I think what we've learned is hindsight's important, but the great thing about these retro games is even if retro game prices are all over the place nowadays,
Yeah.
the Genesis has gotten so many collections and re-releases, and there's so many ways to play these games, both legitimately and not. I think realizing this as adults means that we can just go back and play them. It's kind of nice.
Yeah. And now that we're adults, we in theory have, an expendable income that we can just go off and have a hobby.
Game collecting is too damn expensive nowadays.
Way too expensive.
But with that, thank you very much for coming along to this episode. Do you have anything you'd like to plug social media wise or whatnot?
Oh, I live in a cave, so I don't really do social media, but just because it just popped into my head, and sorry it's not super spectacularly related to video games, but How to Make Everything on YouTube, HTME. They're just starting a series on restarting world's technology and society, which is really cool to watch if you're into ancient history and stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm James. This is Stuff We Say. If you want to see more from me, either listen to other episodes of this podcast or see me on YouTube at Stuff We Play. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Stay classy, and we'll see you next time.